Drummers and disciples of Bonham, this is going to be a lesson on the Danmarks Radio performance of Dazed and Confused. In particular, the emphasis is going to be on the first three fills that Bonham throws down once they get into the main part of the song. They are absolutely stunning, and one of the things that cemented his status as one of the most incredible drummers of all time. They are musical, there's some amount of technical proficiency involved in them, and then the performance element of just the showmanship is something that all came together to make Bonham exactly who he is, and certainly had my jaw on the floor the very first time I saw them 20 plus years ago. I'll also be going over other elements of that performance, although probably not spending as much time and going in depth into them because I'll be doing separate videos on those later. I'm also going to state a quick preface up front. I am playing it on my version of a thermogloss kit, one that I've modeled after John Bonham's set from that era. However, I know that he only had the 14 by 12 and 18 by 16 floor tom. I've got the 16 by 16 as well, so I'm going to be leaving that in there, partly because of it's just my preference, and I like the way the 16 sounds. But I do know that he was playing the 18 and the 14 on that one, not with the 16, but I'm leaving the 16 in here just as my own personal preference. So you can hate on me all you want for that, but I'm just prefacing it up front, so there you go. Now I'm going to be going over two elements in particular of this performance that are crucial to drumming in general, but also John Bonham. And that is going to be playing the actual notes that you are playing as you're going through the particular fills or the song, but then also the performance, which I'm going to classify as sort of the showmanship element of things. With Bonham, and especially again with these fills, to some degree the performance is going to influence the playing because it will inform sort of the feel and the amount of space you put between each note and what you're playing. But it's just important to put on a good show. As the drummer, you're back there behind this kit, and anytime you can elevate yourself physically, literally, above the drums that are blocking you, you're going to give the audience that much more of a performance and a good time. So playing as well as performance, going to emphasize both of those. So I'm going to be counting in 6, although for this first fill in particular, I'm going to be adding an end to it. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and, because I'm going to be cutting off one measure and hitting it on the end. The fill itself goes like this. So again, I'm counting this in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and, because on the 3 and is when you cut off the initial part of the fill. It becomes a little more complicated, I think, at least for me, to count that in my head, but in terms of analyzing and breaking down where that hit takes place, it's on the 3 and. Which will ultimately help you take it into the rest of the fill, which is this fill utilized one of the things that John Bonham did often, which was finish the fill with the double on the kick. Early on, he would complete everything with those doubles, even the drum fill into Good Times, Bad Times. He would do that double. It wasn't it's certainly not a bad technique to develop and integrate into your own playing. The end of the second half of this fill is going to go something like this. And again, slow down. And then again, performance way up in the air. Super cool, super musical. Again, practice that. If you're ever playing a blues song in 6/8, then throw it in there, stun people. Again, it's not something that calls too much attention to itself, but it's very unorthodox overall because of where he starts, that second part of the fill. And again, he comes back and does something similar at the end of the song as well, and we'll get to that shortly. All right, so fill number 2. This is kind of like a quad fill between his hands and his feet. You're leading with your left hand. Now, I lead personally with my right. It's a challenge. If you've seen some of my other videos, again, switching your brain over to the left side or to be left-hand dominant can be kind of a challenge. Bonham, it seems, led with his left hand as the dominant hand with a lot of fills. But this one is not insanely difficult to pull off because of that. It's just in the way you feel between the doubles with your hand and then the doubles with your feet. You really want to actually emphasize the doubles with your feet as much as possible. That's kind of the part that gives it the overall feel of it and makes it seem complete. And the general foundation of it is something like this. Again, you're counting in 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you remember the sticking, you don't really have to worry about trying to balance the numbers in your head with the sticking. The tricky part about this one is just coming back, you're finishing with one hit. It sounds like maybe more is going on there where it's something like this. But especially with the nice technological advancements in YouTube, you can actually slow this down, or if you've slowed it down before, you can hear he actually finishes with just one hit and then comes back on the one with the accent on the crash. So it goes. You don't have to hit that last one very hard. In fact, it doesn't sound like he does, and it almost leaves space in your imagination to hear the extra notes that he's actually not playing. But that's the overall gist of the fill. Now, the performance part of it, again, this is really, it lends itself to some amount of the feel and the way you play it in general. But again, imagine the difference between being at a show and seeing a drummer pull this off like this. You really want to try and get your elbow up as much as possible. Bonham had a tendency to sort of lean into it on this one, and so you can get your body sort of pivoted. To some degree, that helps with your foot and keeping those doubles really consistent and nice. You're not trying to balance the jumpiness of what you're doing with your foot with what's going on the hi-hat, because there's not anything going on the hi-hat right there. But it just helps you kind of keep your foot planted and emphasizing the doubles there. So you can really like. A couple things I'd recommend. I know you're leading with your left hand, but really emphasize the right as much as possible. It doesn't have to be much more, but you want that there leading into the kick drum. So. And then also with the foot, depending on your technique, again, I'd recommend trying to keep your heel not necessarily flat on the pedal or on the ground, but the more you can keep it level and not go too much heel up, you're going to keep the hits, I think, a little more consistent, and it helps to give you the space that you need, because as much as you're going pretty fast on this overall, you really do want to make sure that no notes are kind of tripping over themselves. You want to make sure they are all as consistent as possible throughout. And I have found personally for me that if I really shoot to keep my heel down, at least consciously in my head, that it helps me to keep the two doubles on the kick a little more even and a little more consistent. All right, practice that, build it up to speed, whatever speed, slow or fast. Certainly you will become a lot of people's favorite drummer if you're throwing that into your own original compositions, just because it is so cool looking. All right, fill number 3. Now, this one is a little simpler overall to play, partly because you can just see the entire visual of it. They switched to this angle where you can see literally every note that he plays, and that's nice. That is something like this. Again, takes place over 6. So with this one in particular, in terms of technique, there's not a lot that I can necessarily recommend outside of just watching and trying to do it yourself. You can certainly work on the way that he goes from the... And that's, again, with a strong emphasis with the right hand now and doing ghost notes on the left. So you can try doing something like this. And then really just doing doubles on your left hand at that point while you go back around the snare and toms. So again, I don't know if it's worth spending too much time on that one in particular, just because, again, you've got a clear view of it. It's on, I don't want to say it's on the easier side, but it's certainly, that was the first one I picked up myself when I started trying to mess around with these fills. I had the courage to actually tackle them. So again, if you're a beginner drummer, that's actually probably a good place to start, is on that one, just to feel like you're comfortable with that. By the time you get around to that third sort of cycle through the fills, that one is easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So now that we've gone around the full 3 fills, of course there is that brilliant, amazing singles technique that he has, certainly that I need to continue to work on myself, that goes... I found with those, at least as far as I can get with them, and I should also call out that Bonhamology, George Flutist, has got a great demonstration and analysis of this particular part, at least in one of the videos I remember seeing. So I'm going to try and find that and link it up to that particular part so you can see it, because he does a great job of explaining it and breaking it down, probably more than I will be able to. But with this particular thing, they are singles. It is certainly going to be with the emphasis on the back 3 fingers. You want to keep the sticks nice and loose in between your thumb and your index fingers, and really you can just push them as much as possible. Now, whichever hand is dominant, for me, again, it's my right, I'm trying to make a mental note to emphasize my left hand just a little bit more to try and keep them even and solid, and that's what helps it work and makes it sound sort of like a buzz roll. So again, as I'm doing it, I'm just telling myself, left side just a little bit more. If that starts to become a little too much and I'm emphasizing the left hand, then you scale it back. Certainly something you want to practice as much as possible because it is a really cool way to play this. And again, especially the way you see him play it, it looks neat as well. So you can just go. What I would recommend is counting it off on the hi-hat and just going through every cycle of 4, practicing. So like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. Good technique again to develop. Certainly something that you can spend a lifetime working on and feel like you're falling short of what Bonham was pulling off. That is where I will probably exist. But still, it's a good technique overall to develop, and it will certainly improve your playing in other areas. So let's get into the rest of the song. Now again, I'm not going to spend too much time overall focusing on really expanding on a lot of these ideas, but at least I'm going to call attention to them, show how at least I interpret he plays them, and then at some point down the road I will probably do a more in-depth video on each one of these elements. The first thing I'm going to call attention to is actually back at the very beginning of the song as they go into the sort of intro, is that cool little cymbal choke into the double on the kick drum. Again, 3 hits overall, 1 on the crash cymbal, 2 on the kick. The next part we're going to focus on is this little section that I don't know if I actually play correctly or well, but it's awesome. And so I'm going to try and show at least the way I do it. I think it's what Bonham does, but it's a little sort of what sounds like a buzz roll between the snare and the kick. He does that in the studio version as well. It's awesome. Again, I think it's possible he might be playing more notes with his left hand and leading in, because again, with the way he led with his left hand, that he might have been doing that, so he's getting 3 out of it instead of just the 2 like I am. But certainly it's something worth messing around with. Again, just triplets. All right, of course, the breakdown at the very end, going back into the main section of the song, it's one that's been covered by many, many drummers over many, many lessons here on YouTube. Certainly, I will stick my foot into that water in a longer video at some point, but the main crossover fill at the very end of the song, or going back into the main section of the song, leading with the left again, triplets around the kit. Similar to what you did with the sort of quad fill earlier in the song. Also, little Easter egg for those who may not know, if you speed this up to the power of 1,000, you got the grand finale of Moby Dick. If you cannot do that fill on Dazed and Confused unless you're leading with your right, if that's how you naturally do it, certainly try and practice leading with your left as much as possible. You have to switch over at one point anyways if you are leading with your right, just to do that crossover part. So if you already have to trick your mind into leading with your left there, just try and do it overall in general. At least spend a little bit of time developing that. Maybe 5 minutes a day, spending some time. I need to do it as well, so you and I are in it together. Let's both practice leading with our left a little bit more and getting up to speed so that we can do whatever we want to that is John Bonham related. The other part of this that's worth noting is the performance part, okay? Again, this is something that is sonically very cool sounding and can be very visually stimulating as well for the audience, but it's not so if you're doing this. It's not with your wrists that you're playing this and kind of flipping over like that. Especially when you're doing the Moby Dick climax. You do not want to be just like existing in this space. Your drum kit's blocking what you're doing and nobody can see how awesome and badass it is. So you really want to try and get your elbow up as much as possible. You're sort of creating this parallel effect that you can see very well in the Song Remains the Same Moby Dick. And it's the same for Dazed and Confused. You can see him doing it at the end of this Danmarks Radio performance of how many more times he does this triplet crossover. And that is, during the all join in, sugar and spice, isn't it nice kind of thing, he starts building it up and goes into the triplet. But you really want to try and get your elbow up, okay? Make it rise above the drum kit so that people can see what you're doing. Again, if you want to lean over a little bit, and then you're just throwing your whole body into it. But really when you get to the crossover, you want to try and get your elbow up as much as possible. You don't want it flailing out to the side and all this, and you can also kind of shake your head back and forth if you want to. We'll see if I can demonstrate that well enough. But yeah, showmanship, performance, that's all important. It's not just about the notes, it's about how you display them and how you show them off to the audience and make it fun and exciting for them. So something like this. You get the idea. Again, one that's worth elaborating on further, but just in another video where you can spend a little more time on every single facet of it. Whew. All right, so now we're into the last breakdown with two more cool fills that are loosely based on variations of what we did earlier. First one's going to be which again has you finish the fill with double on the kick. The one thing I'd recommend to, again, develop this in any regard if you're a little more of a novice on the drums is just to work on that sort of accenting with your right hand. And that last fill, again, slow down a little bit, is just. Which takes us into the next fill, which is a variation on the first one we did at the top. So again, with this last one, you are just taking it back around sort of that first exercise that we did. And then throwing a little double on sort of exactly what we just did on that previous fill. Is So that's everything I'm going to cover on this one. If I missed anything in particular that you would like to see me address, please leave a comment down below. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, all that stuff that is supposed to drive the channel that much more. It certainly gives me incentive to keep making these as much as possible. I got a 2-month-old son now and an almost 4-year-old daughter. And as much as they love Daddy playing the drums, I don't like taking too much time away from them. So give me the incentive I need to keep making videos here on YouTube, ripping myself away from my family. Of course, that feels incredibly like I'm exploiting this, which I don't want to. I love doing these videos. I hope you've enjoyed it. Certainly, it's one of my favorite performances ever from Bonham, just because A, there is the visual element of it to enjoy, and B, it's incredibly amazing and inventive in his fills. So I hope you've gotten something out of it. I wish you guys all the best in the meantime between now and next time, and I will see you again soon.